When you look at Auschwitz from above, what strikes you first isn't the individual buildings or even the infamous gate. It's the sheer scale and methodical layout of the entire complex. The Nazis didn't just build a prison. They engineered a system of dehumanization that began the moment victims arrived. The location itself was strategically chosen with chilling precision. Auschwitz sat at the intersection of major railway lines in occupied Poland, making it accessible from across Nazi-occupied Europe. But the geography served another purpose entirely. The camp was built in a marshy area that was naturally isolated, surrounded by rivers and wetlands that made escape nearly impossible. The Sola and Vistula rivers created natural barriers, while the swampy terrain made any attempted flight treacherous and easily trackable. Even the weather worked against prisoners. The region's harsh winters could drop to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, while oppressive summers brought stifling humidity and disease-carrying insects. The Nazis understood that environmental factors could break people down before any direct action was needed. Prisoners arrived already weakened by transport, then faced an environment designed to sap their strength and will to resist. The complex wasn't just one camp, but 3 main installations spread across the 25 square miles, each serving specific functions in the machinery of genocide. Auschwitz I was the main camp and administrative center, housing the commandant's office, administrative buildings, and serving as the nerve center for the entire operation. Auschwitz II Birkenau was the largest section and primary extermination site, built specifically for mass killing with 4 large crematorium complexes. Auschwitz III Monowitz was the labor camp, where prisoners were worked to death in service of German industry, including the massive IG Farben synthetic rubber plant. This separation wasn't accidental. It was designed to maximize efficiency while maintaining secrecy. Officials could claim different purposes for each section, making it harder for outsiders to understand the full scope of operations. The geographic spread also meant that evidence of mass murder at Birkenau was physically separated from the more legitimate appearing administrative and labor functions. The railway of no return. Auschwitz was not only a camp, it was a machine built with chilling precision. At the heart of this system was the railway. The Nazis extended a special train line directly into Birkenau, ending at what they called the ramp. It looked like a normal station, but it was in fact one of history's darkest pieces of engineering. The railway made it possible to move people from almost anywhere in Nazi-occupied Europe. Trains came from Warsaw, Paris, Amsterdam, Greece, Hungary, and beyond. The tracks all matched in size, so the trains could run smoothly across borders. Deportation trains were scheduled just like shipments of coal or steel. To the Nazis, human lives became freight to be delivered. The choice of cattle cars was deliberate. These cars were built for animals, not people. Victims were packed inside for days without food, water, or toilets. By the time the doors opened at Auschwitz, many were already weak, sick, or broken in spirit. From the very start, they were stripped of dignity. The ramp was carefully designed. The platform was long enough for entire trains, wide enough for selections, and sloped so people naturally walked toward the SS officers. Guard dogs barked, searchlights cut through the darkness, and towers surrounded the scene. Everything was arranged to control fear and keep order. Families were separated within minutes, often without a chance to say goodbye. The tracks led straight to the crematoriums. In less than an hour, people could be taken from the train to their death. It was not an accident. It was planned efficiency. Auschwitz turned murder into an organized system, treating human lives like numbers on a schedule. The railway shows us how cruelty can hide behind design. and how technology can be twisted into a weapon. The architecture of deception. The buildings of Auschwitz were not just walls and roofs. They were part of the terror. The most famous example is the gate with the words Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. To prisoners arriving, it gave a spark of false hope. But in reality, it was a cruel trick, meant to control minds as much as bodies. The camp itself looked like a prison, but every detail was designed for control. The blocks were lined up in rows that gave guards clear views in every direction. Pathways and intersections acted like checkpoints, making it impossible for prisoners to move without being watched. Even the neat, organized layout added to the illusion of order, while hiding the brutality inside. The brick buildings seemed almost normal, many of them once Polish army barracks. From the outside, they looked familiar, with windows, doors, and chimneys. But inside, they became tools of suffering. Barracks that were meant for 40 horses were stuffed with 400 people. Overcrowding was no accident. It was meant to crush dignity and turn survival into a daily fight for space, air, and rest. In Auschwitz, even architecture was turned into a weapon of fear and control. The killing machinery. The gas chambers and crematoriums at Birkenau were the darkest example of how human skill and engineering can be twisted for evil. These places were not built in haste. They were carefully designed, adjusted, and perfected over time by the Nazis to kill more people faster, with less resistance. It was mass murder turned into an industrial process. Crematorium 2 and the 3 were built to be identical. Each one could kill up to 1,500 people at a time. On paper, the design looked simple. Underground rooms where people were told to undress, gas chambers where they were murdered, and crematoriums above ground where their bodies were burned. But every detail of these buildings was chosen with one goal: to keep victims calm until the very last second, and to make the killing as efficient as possible. The changing rooms, for example, were filled with false hope. Hooks were numbered, so people thought they would get their clothes back. Signs in different languages encouraged them to remember their number. Benches were placed to make undressing easier. Fake shower heads and painted walls created the illusion of safety, tricking families into believing they were simply going through a sanitation process. Even the structure itself was calculated. The ceilings were built high enough so people wouldn't panic right away, but low enough to save material. Floors were made from surfaces that could be cleaned quickly, with drains to wash away what was left behind. Nothing was designed for human care. Everything was designed for speed. The gas chambers were sealed with heavy doors, impossible to open from inside. Small windows allowed guards to watch. Ventilation systems spread poison gas efficiently and then cleared it afterward, so the next group could be brought in within minutes. Engineers even thought about the weight of hundreds of bodies, reinforcing floors and sloping them so they could be dragged more easily. Above ground, the crematoriums looked like ordinary industrial buildings. Their chimneys were built to specific heights, so smoke would spread quietly with the wind, hiding the truth. Trucks could pull up for body removal and ash disposal, treating people as if they were waste. Elevators carried bodies from the gas chambers to the ovens, so even workers wouldn't slow down the process. The whole system was designed to never stop. While one chamber was being cleared, another could be used. It was killing made into a machine, cold, efficient, and built to erase human life with terrifying precision. The psychology of space. Auschwitz was not only about buildings and fences, it was about how space itself was turned into a weapon. The camp's very design was used to break down the spirit of its prisoners. At Birkenau, the crematoriums were placed at the far end of the camp. They weren't hidden. In fact, they were built so people could see them from the barracks, Prisoners watched the smoke rising, smelled the burning, and lived each day with a reminder that death was waiting. The placement itself was a cruel form of psychological torture. The fencing system added to this constant fear. Multiple rows of electrified barbed wire surrounded the camp. The space between fences was wide enough that any escape attempt would be obvious, yet narrow enough to make the prisoners feel trapped at all times. It was a cage you could never forget. Even the roads and pathways were planned to enforce control. The main roads were wide for vehicles and roll calls, but the paths to barracks were deliberately narrow, forcing prisoners to walk in single file. This way, they could be counted, monitored, and reminded of their powerlessness. The camp itself became a weapon, crushing hope before a word was spoken. The expansion of evil. As the Holocaust grew, Auschwitz itself began to change. The camp was no longer just a prison. It became a machine built for mass murder. The Nazis treated killing like an engineering challenge, always looking for ways to make it faster, bigger, and more efficient. The clearest example of this was Birkenau, also called Auschwitz-Birkenau. Unlike the first camp, which used old Polish army barracks, Birkenau was designed from the ground up with one purpose: extermination. Its layout was divided into clear zones: arrival, selection, barracks, and killing. The railway tracks led directly inside the camp, right up to the ramp where selections happened. Transport and murder were not separate steps anymore. They were part of one system. The gas chambers also evolved with this cold logic. The first, Crematorium 1, was a converted building with limited space. But the Nazis learned from this and built crematoriums at 2 through V at Birkenau as purpose-built killing centers. These were bigger, faster, and designed with every detail planned, from the underground changing rooms to the ovens above ground. Even building materials told a horrifying story. As resources ran short, the Nazis mixed the ashes of victims into concrete for new construction. The dead were literally built into the walls and foundations of the camp itself. It was not just about saving materials, it was about erasing people, turning their remains into part of the machinery of death. The building process was disturbingly normal. German companies competed for contracts to design and build crematoriums. Engineers measured sites, drew up blueprints, and created schedules, as if they were constructing ordinary factories. Workers followed orders, treating murder facilities as just another job. Sub-camps spread across the region, each designed with the same principles. Labor camps were built near factories, with barracks placed to keep prisoners close to work sites, but under constant surveillance. Temporary camps were set up quickly as the war front shifted, designed for fast assembly and easy dismantling. Even small details, like the spacing of guard towers or the size of latrines, were standardized for maximum efficiency. The design principles of Auschwitz were not limited to one place. The Nazis created mobile killing units and temporary facilities across Europe using the same methods. Auschwitz became the model, a blueprint for how to control, dehumanize, and destroy people on an industrial scale. The science of suffering. The so-called medical facilities at Auschwitz were not places of healing. They were places of horror. The hospital blocks were built not to save lives, but to carry out experiments and killings, all under the false mask of medical care. Their location inside the camp was carefully chosen. They were close enough to the prisoners to provide easy access to victims, but far enough to hide the worst of what was happening. From the outside, the buildings looked normal, even carrying Red Cross symbols to pretend they followed medical rules. Inside, it was different. Operating rooms had tools for experiments, not for healing. Recovery areas looked more like cells than wards. Even the morgues were oversized, built to hold victims of murder, not natural death. Legacy in concrete and steel. Today, when you walk through the preserved parts of Auschwitz, you can still feel the weight of its design. The buildings, the fences, and the towers create a pressure that lingers, even for visitors who know they can leave at any time. That feeling is not an accident. It was carefully planned. The camp forces us to face a painful truth. Human creativity and technical skill can be used for terrible purposes. Every design choice, from the height of the fences to the position of the guard towers, was made to control, to break hope, and to make murder more efficient. Auschwitz shows us how architecture and engineering can be twisted into weapons. Remembering this design matters. It reminds us that the same hands that can build hospitals, schools, and bridges can also build prisons and death camps if guided by hatred. The evil of Auschwitz was not only in the killings themselves, but in how methodical and calculated they were, down to the smallest detail. This is why we preserve these places, not to glorify evil, but to learn from it. Auschwitz stands as both a memorial to those who suffered and a warning to the rest of us. It tells us to be watchful about how we use our knowledge and skills and whose purposes they serve. If this history touched you, share it. Speak about it. The camp was designed to kill and to erase memory. By remembering and teaching, we resist that erasure. Never forget.